The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
My baby dolls, we are back again with another episode of Genesis in the Zone with your host, that's me, Ian Kahanowitz. And you know something? We've just passed mid-May. We're coming to the end of May, which means, hey, it's time for a quarter report on what's going on in baseball. And tell you right now, the American League East, hottest ticket in the majors right now. You got Boston up where I live versus my Yankees, where I was born, fighting it out. You know, Arizona's doing well, and you know, the AL Central. I mean, that's going to be a neck and neck race. I really like the Twins. You know, the Indians should be far ahead of the rest of the pack. Not a great division, but I'll tell you, the NL Central, everyone's doing well there. So, you know, there's a lot of baseball left, but you know, I'm taking the inventory of what's going on. But you know, today we're going to break from the current stuff, and we're gonna get a recurring guest back here, Joe Cox. We had him on last year. And, you know, we had him on, I think, around this time. And then we talked about his book, Almost Perfect, The Heartbreaking Pursuit of Pitcher's Holy Grail. And that book came out, I believe, 2 years ago or a year ago now. You know, we're dealing with this book, which is another great book. It's called The Immaculate Inning, Unassisted Triple Plays, 40-40 seasons, and the stories behind baseball's rarest feats. And so we're talking about, you know, 2 home runs in one game. What's an immaculate inning? We'll find out shortly. You know, pitchers pitching 300 strikeouts in a season. Also, will anyone ever win 300 games, especially with the new system with, pitch count and all this. So it's a very, very good book. Before I even bring Joe out and before I even get into the book, it's a well worth book to go out and get, because I'll tell you this. It's one of those things where you crack open the book. You don't have to read it cover to cover. You can read it in an hour. You can read it, you know, piecemeal. You can read it whenever you want to know some valuable trivia or some interesting aspect of rare feats in Major League Baseball. I'm breaking for station identification. You are listening to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network with the Zigzag Man, Ralph Tycho. And boy, this network is growing. We had our first podcast, live show on Sports Byline, and, now we're going national. Besides just podcasting, we're doing live radio interviews. That's going to be with Lenny Randall, former Major League player. Got Peter Golenbach. We got Hal Bach. We got all these guys who have a podcast on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Hey, we're doing live radio. We're moving up in the world. And I'm always moving up because, you know, hey, I've been on this great network, and I'm loving my time here. Every show I do is a great show. My podcast with former Brady Bunch, leader of the pack over there, Barry Williams, I did the other day, and he was a great guest. He was very amicable, had a great show. That'll be published soon. Talked about the Brady Bunch and what he's doing today. And sometimes I break from sports, and that's okay, because just like you watch a sporting game, you need commercials. And with me, you never know who's going to come. Gloria Loring's coming back to the show June 1st. And if you don't know who Gloria Loring is, she was married to Alan Thicke, who was the head of the household. In Growing Pains, he played Jason Seaver, the father. Of course, their son is the very famous singer Robin Thicke. I got to get Robin on the show, too. You know, you just never know who's going to come on. But that's another time, another story. Joe Cox. Now, who the heck is he, huh? Well, if you don't remember, you know, he's an attorney down in Kentucky, another one that went to law school. And you know, like the rest of us attorneys here, you lose half your brains by going to law school. They teach you to think a whole different way. Hey, he wrote that book I told you about, which is another book to go out and get, Almost Perfect, The Heartbreaking Pursuit of Pitching Holy Grail, a member of the Society for American Baseball Research. Of course, that's SABR, and they are the gurus of historical baseball. Cox co-authored several of the sports books, and again, he's down in Kentucky with his family, so he's a little warmer than us. Without any further ado, welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you, Ian. Always good to be with you.
Always good to have you back. Again, the Derby a few weeks ago. Pouring rain.
This time of year, you get a lot of that in Kentucky, and we've battled it here over the last 24 hours again. So,
let me ask you something. How did you get Jessica Mendoza to write the forward for your book?
Well, a lot of luck. The folks at ESPN were kind enough to help that happen. And, with her schedule, there was a lot of back and forth. And then one Saturday morning, we finally got to connect. And such a fun lady to talk with. She and I are about the same age. So the fun thing is we start talking baseball. And even though she was in California and I was in Kentucky, we remember the same players. We remember the same stories. So in a lot of ways, it was kind of like just hanging out with an old friend, even though it was the first time I'd ever talked to her. Let me ask you. I think your last book was published by Rowan and Littlefield. Now this is published by Lion Press. Did you get any difference between Lion's Press and Rowan and Littlefield? They're under the same umbrella. I'm not sure technically how it's classified, but it's the same folks. It may have a different name on it, but it's two doors in the same building, I think. All right. Hey, that's fine. All right, let's start. What's happening with turning an unassisted triple play? That thing is so rare. It's only happened 15 times. Let's get into the meat of it. Who is in these kind of things, and how rare is this? Well, it's pretty rare, as you say. And the funny thing was, off of the Almost Perfect book, my first idea was to do a whole book about the unassisted triple play. And, that'll tell you the kind of stories you get into. But at the same time, my editor from Almost Perfect, Keith Wallman, said, well, it's interesting, but why stop at one thing? Let's do some more things. So Unassisted Triple Plays became a chapter instead of a book, but it hasn't happened since 2009. There's a great story about the first unassisted triple play because it may or may not have been an unassisted triple play. But it's an interesting random group of players who've happened to have history kind of fall in their lap to turn an unassisted triple play. I think I've seen it maybe once in my lifetime. And you know what? I'm forgetting who did that, but I might have lost. I remember it happened. I think the Yankees turned it, but my memory these things are so rare. I just don't recall. But let me ask you this: this is what the book title is. Out of everything in the book, why pitching an immaculate inning highlights the name of this book? Yeah, that's an outstanding question, and I had absolutely zero role in it. It was suggested to me, and I said, well, I guess that works as well as anything else. I think they just like this notion of first it's alliterative, and then to have, one of the feats kind of represent something particularly superlative. Although you could say that with any number of baseball feats. I mean, it's the Grand Slam, and then I talk about the Super Slam in here. People tend to put superlatives into names of rare things. It's not, the humdrum slam or the boring inning. I don't know what the thought process was, but it was suggested to me, and I thought that'll work as well as anything. So, well, let me ask you this. Let's talk about what is a pitching an immaculate inning. We know it's rare to get a perfect game going, but what's pitching an immaculate inning about? Well, an immaculate inning might be in a microcosm the most perfect pitching feat because it is a 9-pitch, 3-strikeout inning. It is truly perfect in that not only does no one get a hit, no one puts a ball into play, and the pitcher doesn't even throw a ball. And there are some of the immaculate innings I need to further classify this. It should be the uber immaculate inning or something where there won't even be a foul ball hit. So Drew Storen is a reliever. He was with the Reds. I talked to him for the book. And he said one of the things that stood out when he pitched an immaculate inning, nobody made any contact. He pitched the inning with the same ball. So he literally took the same baseball 9 strikes, past 3 different hitters, sat him down. Nobody even touched him for a foul ball. And as a pitcher, you can't do any better than that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think you talked about Koufax here in the same chapter, if I'm not mistaken. But you had Bob Gibson with a 1.12 ERA. I mean, these things are so rare. And another rare occurrence here, and I remember this way back, I think in 94 or 5, maybe 5, when Roger Clemens struck out 20 batters in a game. And everyone up here was screaming, it might have been 96, that he just did it because he's going on the market, and he ended up going to Toronto winning 2 Cy Young Awards. But, again, striking out 20 batters in a single game. What's up with this?
Yeah, not something you see a lot. I was lucky enough to be at home the last time it happened in 2016. Max Scherzer did it, and it's just phenomenal to see. The Kerry Wood game, again, something that's only happened a handful of times, but if you get to see a pitcher strike out 20 hitters, it's going to be one of the most memorable things you ever saw, just because to get more than 2/3 of the outs in a complete game by strikeout, you've got to have overwhelming stuff. It probably helps to play against a mediocre team, although in most cases, the pitchers who did this were playing against pretty good teams. But Clemens, did it in the 90s and did it once before in 86. He's the only guy who's done it twice. But small club guys with just super nasty stuff who hit a day when it's the perfect storm and nobody can touch them. It's a lot of fun to watch, unless you're trying to hit them, I guess.
I remember Scherzer, and I was very, very happy this week because he was due to pitch against the Yankees on Wednesday, and it rained out, and I was happy that both games were canceled with the Nationals. So, Scherzer is one of those old style pitchers. You don't really want to face. He has some really nasty stuff. So,
yeah.
Yes. Now, look, this is one of my favorite. Now, 4 strikeouts in an inning. Now, of course, you strike out 3, the ball goes by the catcher, and then the runner reaches first base before the throw. This has been accomplished 87 times. Last year, you had 4 instances of it, so it's more common than you could think.
Yeah, it really is, and again, you talk about something that takes almost a perfect storm. You've got to have that wild pitch or that pass ball on one of the strikeouts. And, this is one where I dug back in the history books to find the first instance. It's 1885, Bobby Matthews of the Philadelphia Athletics. But what was interesting, we've never had a 5 strikeout inning, but Matthews could have had it. He had 2 wild pitches. So he faced a 5th batter. He could have struck out 5 batters in an inning, but the 3rd out made contact off of him. So, maybe someday when I do even more immaculate innings, we'll have a 5 strikeout inning to talk about.
Can you imagine a pitcher? Well, that's it could happen with the Yankees. With Gary Sanchez has a lot of pass balls. They're giving the poor guy, a lot of grief. They gave him last year, and he was benched, and now his hitting, got to go up. But he still has 30-something ribbies and over 10 home runs already. Well, here we go. Hitting for the cycle, one of my favorite things. And 7 of them did it last year, huh?
Yeah, the hitting for the cycle was one of those things that I would have assumed was a lot more rare than it is. I counted up 319 instances of players hitting for the cycle. But the fun thing with any of these incidents is you run into guys who hit for the cycle who didn't know there was a thing of hitting for the cycle. And granted, Ian, my baseball career ended in high school, but I was very much aware of what hitting for the cycle was. It was a lot harder for me to do it than it was to know what it was. But Dave Kingman was one who did it and was told about it after the game. He said, "What's that? I didn't know that was a thing."
Hey, Kingman is an interesting guy. Back in the 70s, he harks back to an era of the tape-measured home run. Especially when you didn't have the PEDs and you didn't work out as much as you did. But he I always liked him. He would hit 250 and smack 30 home runs in, and and especially played for the Mets, Yankees, especially the Cubs. But he had tape-measured home runs, and he was also a good sport. With the press, he's just one of those guys that you really love, and they called him King Kong because of it. It's going to hit because no one's kept these stats. What's a cycle? What the hell's that? No one. I mean, years ago, in the time of Dave Kingman and the time of Ricky Henderson, they stole bases. 130 stolen bases in 1980 by Ricky Henderson. Tim Raines did, 80 or more. I think he had over 100 one season. But the game has changed, and now again we focus on power, which again hitting 4 home runs in a game. Again 4 home runs. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, nobody can anticipate that. And that was one of the common threads in talking to some of the guys who did it. And as is the case with so many of these feats, the list has Willie Mays, it has Mike Schmidt, it has Lou Gehrig, but it also has Pat Seary and Mark Whitten and Scooter Gennett. So there's a certain amount of fluke and there's a certain amount of skill. The story that I thought was fun with 4 home runs in a game, the first guy to do it is a guy named Bobby Lowe in 1894, and nobody was hitting a large amount of home runs at that time. And Lowe had a game in a short ballpark where he just caught fire and hit 4. There was a second game of a split doubleheader, and in between the games, he had gone to a local restaurant and had a big fish dinner. And superstitious ball player that he was, whenever he was back in the area, he would try to go by that restaurant and have the same meal. It didn't get him any more 4 home run games. But I talked to Scooter Gennett during the 2017 season. At that point, he was the most recent guy to have done it. J.D. Martinez went on and did it again as the year went. But I told Scooter the story, and I said, so what did you eat the night you hit the 4 homers? And he thought about it, and he said, the good news is I had a burger, and I like burgers. But he said, I don't think a burger is going to get me 4 home runs in the game again.
Yeah, that's just great stuff. This is great stuff. 6 walks in the game. Now, you know something? I don't think I saw Bonds on this list, and you would think Bonds would be on this list.
Yeah, you would, but again, it's one of those lists that, there's a certain amount of sense in that you go, okay, Jimmy Fox, yeah, I can see that. Jeff Bagwell, if you remember him in his prime. But Walt Wilmot is probably not a guy you would think of. Andre Thornton was a very good player, but yeah, you would think of Barry Bonds, you would think of Babe Ruth, and they're not on this list. It's a certain amount of skill and a certain amount of situation that just have to come together the right way, and 5 times it's happened.
Yeah, it's I love that kind of stuff. Especially they just put you. Well, you know what? Let me ask you this: Nat LaJoie and Ty Cobb, they had that whole Chalmers thing. I'm forgetting if they walked Cobb purposely, and then they let LaJoie hit. Because he had 8 hits in a doubleheader, and everyone said it was thrown, that they had to give both of them the call. I'll have to redo that and take a look if Cobb was walked 8 different times to keep his average down in the game. Knocking in 10 runs. How about that? That's huge.
Yeah, there are a few, and when you think about what goes into it, it's amazing that there's anybody. The first guy to do it was Wilbert Robinson, who was the woebegone manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers in their early years. But he had a good playing career, and then one day in 1892, lightning struck. He knocked in 10 runs. But you get a lot of interesting stories. You got A-Rod, you got Reggie Jackson, but you've got Norm Zalkin and Phil Weintraub too. So Weintraub was a guy who I didn't know much about. Was kind of a part-time player, puts up these great numbers. You look him up in the baseball encyclopedia, and you're going to think, why did this guy not have a 15-year career where he had 2,000 hits? And the answer, honestly, is I don't know why. I could never find anybody saying anything bad about him, but he'd hit, 290 with some power and then disappear for 4 years. It's one of the strangest careers I've ever seen. But he had a great game during World War II and knocked in 10 runs.
Yeah. I mean, now let me ask you. I forget, homering on the first pitch faced in the major leagues. That is the first pitch. I remember Dan Pasqua, there's a name from the past, from the Yankees, had a home run in his first at bat, but I'm not quite sure if it was the first pitch. But anyway, that's my recollection of something like that. Wilson Contreras of the Chicago Cubs was the last one to do that.
Yeah, he was, and that was actually one of the things I talked with Jessica Mendoza about when we were kind of putting our minds together on thoughts for the forward, because I knew she called that game. She was there in Wrigley and remembered it well. The odd thing with that is you would think you would have some great slugger who had gone to the plate and done that, and there are a fair number of guys who were great players who homered on their first at bat. But the first pitch, it does take a special kind of, I don't know, stubbornness or naivete to go up there and hack at the first pitch you see and then blast it. But the career home run leader of the guys who homered on the first pitch they faced is Jay Bell, who was a competent but not superstar level middle infielder in Pittsburgh and I think Arizona later. He hit 195 homers, and he's the leader in the clubhouse, although Contreras could certainly give that a run.
Yeah, I don't know. There's patient hitters and there's impatient hitters, and usually those with home runs either fall in one or two categories. One, they're impatient, so they'll swing anything close to the plate, and two, the patient hitters go to high counts, 3-1, 3-2, and they just wait on the pitch. So it can go either way. Homering on the first pitch face. Now, let me ask you this. It goes back. It goes way back into the 1920s, and that's very important because what people don't realize is that the live ball period killed what was in the dead ball era. And it was very difficult to get a home run with a ball that looked like a head of cabbage. So when they changed it, it was. And in the and when they did that, like you said, the likely achievers there were Jay Bell and Marcus Thames, but there were two surprises here. There was a few surprises. 8 were pitches.
Yeah. You got a lot of guys who that was pretty much their career story. And I talked with a guy who played for the Astros named Mark Sacamano, and Mark was 2 for 10 as a major league hitter. He's retired now. He's a financial guy down in Texas. So it pretty much was his career, and we talked about it, and he credits all of his to his minor league manager, Dave Clark, who I remembered as a Pirates outfielder. The minor league season ending, Dave Clark was on the bench for the Astros when Sacamano got the call September of 2008. And Sacamano's just running around. He said he'd been done with the season for a week, and honestly, he told me he was doing laundry at his girlfriend's house when the phone rang, and somebody said, "Can you be in Houston tonight?" He runs to the ballpark, shows up just as the game's starting, and he's sitting there talking with Dave Clark, and he says, "You think I'm going to get in the bat? Be ready." And he said, "I don't know, man. I haven't swung a bat, and if I get up there, I'm probably just going to take a pitch." And Clark just lit into him and used some words I can't repeat on the podcast, but basically said, if you get up there and he throws you a first pitch fastball, you better swing. Sacamano gets up there and he throws him a first pitch fastball and he swings, and the ball goes out of the ballpark, and in his hometown in front of his family, he has this moment that really basically was his major league career. He's 1 for 9 for the rest of the time, but still it's a great story and one that I enjoyed hearing and then getting to tell.
We got 6 hits in a game. Huge over here.
Yeah, just had this happen the other day, and again, you got a lot of guys who are great hitters who never get here, and you got a lot of guys who you've never heard of who get here. And you even get, a couple of times had the 7-hit game. Rennie Stennett in the 70s with the Pirates as the guy who did that last. It helps when you win 22-0 like the Pirates did that day. But he was a little bit hurt that day and actually was going to Danny Murtaugh, the manager, and asking to come out of the game. And Murtaugh was kind of laughing and saying, no, as long as you're getting hits, I'm going to keep you in here. And in the 8th inning, he comes up and gets a triple for his 7th hit of the day. And then Murtaugh sends in a pinch runner and says, okay, I'll take you out now. You're done. But, he certainly didn't see it coming because he wasn't even feeling that well that day. But again, when your team puts up 22, you're going to get some chances to get some hits.
Let me ask you this. In the next chapter, what's the Super Slam?
The Super Slam is an attempt to put a name on something that when I start talking about this, you're going to know what I'm talking about, but people don't tend to put a name on it. Your team is down 3. It's the bottom of the 9th inning. The bases are loaded, and you come to bat and you hit a grand slam to win the game by 1 run. From down 3 in the last at bat. Every kid in the world who's playing, for 10 games in the backyard has hit a Super Slam. But in Major League Baseball, it's only happened 28 times.
Yeah, I even wrote about, hey, every kid dreams about this situation. You're down 3, bottom of the 9th. Here we go. I've dropped about it 1 million times. Now, here's something, I learned from my reading Ty Cobb, but this has happened more. Can you imagine stealing for the cycle in 1 inning? That's crazy. What kind of catcher do you have? What kind of pitcher do you have? Not holding him on base.
Yeah, you these days it's a lot harder because, of course, nobody steals home. And I pointed out it's happened 51 times, but it's only happened 11 times since World War II. So, again, in the dead ball era, you had Ty Cobb, a shoeless Joe Jackson, and Eddie Collins. They would do this. These days, there's almost always some trickery. Like Jason Worth did this. But Jason Worth, you think about him, and he's kind of deceptively fast. He's not slow, but, he's not a Ricky Henderson type. But you get a left-handed pitcher who just falls asleep with a guy on third base who sees it coming, and he can light out and steal home, or you can run the delayed double steal with first and third. You've almost got to have something like that because, I can't remember the last time I was watching a game and a guy just took off down the third base line and stole home. It's looking for a dinosaur these days. But a few guys, by hook or by crook, pull it off.
Jackie Robinson, probably had the most famous steal home, but he didn't steal for the cycle in that game. It was in the 56 World Series, I think, and then, to his dying day, Yogi Berra said he was out. But you see that image of Jackie running on the pitch. Think about the logic of this. You stole second. You stole third. Aren't you kind of winded to go home when the pitcher winds up? That's what's going through my mind when I think of something like that. But here's another interesting thing. Stealing 6 bases in a single game. It's only happened 7 times.
Yeah, and surprisingly, it's happened fairly recently. You would think that this would be something you wouldn't see in modern baseball. And in fact, it happened in old baseball, and then there was a gap of about 80 years, but then 3 guys have done it since 1991. Carl Crawford was the last in 2009. But, one of the fun things of a book like this is seeing the ebb and flow in baseball and the way that stolen bases went from a pivotal part of baseball to being almost completely forgotten and then came back, and now they're kind of out of style again. So you kind of get to where you can anticipate the revolution, and I firmly believe if I live long enough, I'll see more guys coming out and stealing for the cycle in an inning, stealing 6 bases in a game. The thing that's out of style today has a way in 5 or 10 years of turning around and being, the craze of the sport, and I think running will be the same way.
It's funny because now we're in a time in Major League Baseball you don't really see the bunt. You don't see them stealing bases anymore. The whole game has changed, and I don't know if, playing the long ball is better than playing the small ball. Because I think when you look back at things, the Expos of the 1980s and 90s, were very successful with having Reigns and a fast team. The St. Louis Cardinals back in the 80s were also very successful. Wherever Ricky Henderson went, he gets on first base either from a walk or a base hit. It's almost automatically a double. Vince Coleman, you don't see that anymore. It is so rare to steal a base compared to years ago. It's almost sad that everyone's shooting for the fences. You got Stanton and Judge, on the Yankees. You got Trout, and Pujols down in, Los Angeles. Everyone's going for the long ball these days, and they're trying to do it without PEDs. And we're going to talk about by the end of your book your 50 home runs or more. But here's something interesting. Getting on base 17 consecutive plate appearances. Now, can you imagine that? It's only happened twice. But can you imagine, and you list a whole bunch of other people. I remember Frank Thomas managed that, and I think Ted Williams also came close. But can you imagine? That's either by a walk, a pass ball, a hit. Let's talk about getting on base. 17 consecutive plate appearances.
Yeah, and this was a fun one because a lot of these records or these marks are the kind of things that everybody in the ballpark is watching. These days, everybody around the country, you get word, Giancarlo Stanton has 3 homers in a game. Well, everybody's going to tune in to see if he gets the 4th one. This was the opposite of that. This record was so obscure, nobody knew who held it. And the only way we even got to Piggy Ward from 1893, who was traded in the middle of setting this mark, by the way, which is hilarious, is that Frank Thomas got close to what Ward did in the 1990s, and then somebody said, well, what's the record? And somebody had Ted Williams, but the official Major League Baseball record book just said we don't have enough confidence to put that down as a record. So enter the good folks at Sabre, and when I'm researching this, I'm in Cooperstown, and I find the gentleman who I mentioned his name. It slips my mind in the book, but he's actually gone through box scores from 1893 and demonstrated that this obscure outfielder, Piggy Ward, who had a brief and not particularly noteworthy career, over the span of a handful of days, goes 8 for 8, gets walked 8 times, gets hit by pitch once, 17 straight plate appearances. He reaches base. He gets traded from one team to the team that they're playing in the middle of his street, and is completely forgotten. So at least hopefully wherever they are out there, the heirs and descendants of Piggy Ward, I hope that they appreciate the 15 minutes that maybe he'll get out of this. But his record was unappreciated for basically a century.
Now, you know what's interesting? In this one over here, getting a hit in 12 consecutive at-bats, now think of that. You're going to raise your average by a heck of a lot. But you really think it's going to, that it's a vulnerable stat, that, although it's happened only 3, we got Dustin Pedroia came up 1 bat shy. You think it's attainable to get 12 consecutive at-bats, getting a hit there?
It is. It's probably one of those things where it's harder now than it was in the era when it happened. It happened between 1902 and 1952 all 3 times. So certainly there was no ESPN to start carrying every at-bat live once a guy gets 9 hits in a row or 10 hits in a row. But Pedroia, he's 1 hit away. I did point out in here, if you just flip a coin a dozen times, and certainly baseball knows no 500 hitter. I mean, Ty Cobb hits 366, and that's the ultimate standard. But in theory, a 500 hitter makes it a coin toss. If you flip a coin a dozen times in a row, the odds that it's going to come up tails or heads all 12 times is 1 in 4,096. So logically, you'd think you'd never see this, but hot streaks are never logical. And if they can withstand the media scrutiny that will come as the record's approached, I think we could see this again.
And you know what's now we're talking about the long ball again. And hitting a home run in 8 consecutive games. I remember 1987 with Don Mattingly, and I remember going to work. I used to work in a supermarket. I was about 17 years old. And I remember every day in the back room or the stock room where all the stuff was, they had their TVs out looking to see if Magley's going to do it. And I remember when he did it. And so this is one thing that's near and dear to my heart. Let's talk about hitting a home run in 8 consecutive games.
Yeah, I'm with you. Obviously, I don't go back to Dale Long in 1956, who's the first guy who does it, but Mattingly I remember, and Griffey I remember. There's so many great home run hitters, but just to get the chance, I have no doubt in his prime, Barry Bonds is the guy who could have been on this list, but nobody was going to pitch to him enough for him to hit home runs in 8 games in a row. The wear and tear is a real thing, and then the media attention is a real thing, which kind of makes it surprising to me that this has happened with Mattingly and with Griffey in an era when, I'm with you. I remember the attention of baseball kind of turns to this because it's such a fun, crazy thing. But that's another thing. Given the emphasis on the long ball, if a guy like a Stanton, if a guy like a Mike Trout sees enough strikes over the course of a season, we could see this again.
And let me just say something here. I don't know if you thought about it, but it dawned on me when I read it before. All 3 of these guys, Griffey, Long, and Mattingly, they're all lefties. Yeah,
absolutely. There's got to be some significance there.
They're all lefties. Well, hey, look, 40-40 season. Remember when Canseco did that back in the 1988 year when they went to the World Series, lost to the Dodgers that year, but it's only happened 4 times. And I was surprised about this because, you look at Bonds, you look at Alex Rodriguez in their prime. I do remember when Alfonso Soriano did it. Hey, let's talk about this.
Yeah, the combination of speed and power is a rare thing, and that, again, baseball's had times when it emphasized speed enough to have a lot of guys stealing 40 bases, but they tend to be slap hitters, or you'll have guys hitting 40 balls out of the ballpark. But in most of baseball's, many eras, that's such a relatively rare thing that you're not going to get a lot of guys with speed hitting the ball out of the ballpark like that. So, the question here is, can you do it naturally? And the answer is, with the exception of Soriano, that's a good question. I'm careful to point out that there's no evidence that Bonds or Rodriguez were juicing when they had their 40-40 seasons. But at the same time, they're both guys who subsequently, by all indications, were likely juicing. So, the fact that there's doubt, the fact that we've got to quantify and qualify, shows really how hard it is to be one of the fastest guys and one of the strongest guys in baseball at the same time.
And you make a good point here. And what I want to do is just break from the book for a second. And I want, because a lot of the guys who are on PEDs are in your book, Clemens and Bonds and all these guys. And, from the mid-1990s, to the mid-2000s, PEDs. It just happened with Robinson Cano the other day. What's your view on PEDs, and should these folks be punished and not admitted to the Hall of Fame because of them juicing?
Yeah, well, the biggest tragedy to me of the era is that it colors everything that happened. And we have the players who, are named in the Mitchell report or otherwise circumstantially, it became pretty clear were probably juicing. But it's hard to look at anybody's numbers and be certain that they weren't. And it's hard to even have a context. How many players were? Was it 10% of baseball? Was it 50%? Was it 80%? That makes a big difference in trying to contextualize some of these crazy numbers that came out of that era. Now, what do you do about it as far as the Hall of Fame? Obviously, the tragedy there is you're going to, in some instance, punish somebody who's not guilty, and or much more likely, you're going to avoid punishing somebody who did do it. I mean, let's throw out a random name, and I'm not insinuating anything about this guy. Just he's a good example that works for our purposes. Take Jeff Bagwell. I have no reason to believe that Jeff Bagwell used PEDs, but he puts up most of his best numbers in an era when a lot of players were. Can I say authoritatively that he didn't? No, absolutely I can't. So undoubtedly there's somebody who's going to sneak in because they were lucky enough to avoid the spotlight and not look like they were cheating when in fact they were. I'm not saying Bagwell is one of those guys, just he's a good example for our purposes. So how do you rectify it in the long haul? I think the Hall of Fame is probably going to end up having a year where they hold their nose and they vote these guys in. And there are going to be a lot of unhappy people about it, but the numbers are moving in that direction. And again, with guys like Cano, I think it's still going to have a presence, even if it's not widespread. And sooner or later, those guys go in. Although to me, possibly, Ian, the more interesting question is, when you put them in, do you have any second look at a Pete Rose, at a Joe Jackson? And those guys may, inevitably get a boost out of the steroid era, which would be an odd happenstance.
So I'm gonna throw it in perspective here because you're a lawyer like me, and it's gonna give a new angle to things to many of my listeners because they know how I feel about it. I think anyone who used PEDs should be in the Hall of Fame, and they should not have been excluded for baseball for two reasons. Number one, Marvin Miller always said, and when he was executive director, he never agreed to any drug testing. And when he died in 2012, he firmly believed that whatever a baseball player did in his own time, that was it. It was his right of privacy. Okay? Cocaine was big in his era. Tim Raines admitted he kept his vial in his pants, and that's why he learned to slide head first so that he didn't have to break the vial in his back and all this stuff. And when Donald Fair, who succeeded Miller as executive director of the union, came to an agreement with Peter Uberoff to do the testing, on cocaine and the whole cocaine trials, Miller went wild. Now, let's fast forward a decade later. Mark McGuire's using creatine. There were over 5,000 steroids out there. And when they were cracking down on these guys, there was no rule that you can not use this. They wanted to make an example of these guys. And there was no rules regarding that. So in my opinion, you still got to hit the ball. And if you're going to juice, why wouldn't you? So instead of hitting a 300-foot home run, well, now it's a 300-foot fly ball. Well, now it's a 429-foot home run. You still got to hit the ball. So it made you stronger, okay? It makes you faster. It makes you throw faster and live longer, on the mound like Roger Clemens or Andy Pettitte. So to me, doing that, I don't have a problem because I adhere to Miller. Whatever the players do, it's their body. In the end, they're going to all become like Lyle Ozano, where he got sick from, doing PEDs when he was on the Oakland Raiders and Denver Broncos back in the 70s and 80s. Hey, you know what? Baseball wanted to clean it up and make it a sport for family, and those are the examples. Rafael Palmeiro, Canseco, Bonds, McGuire, all of them. The greatest players of the generation, and they're being denied. Now, Pete Rose, okay? Three things about Pete Rose. Number one, the reason he accepted, lifelong ban,
right,
because they couldn't tell in the Down report if he bet on, his own team, which if you go back to 1927, it's funny because I have two books coming out. One on the Ty Cobb Speaker affair, which talks about right after the affair in 1926, Landis instituted the rules for it. And the distinction here is if you bet on a game and you're a baseball player, it's in every clubhouse, you'll be suspended a year. If you bet on your own team, then there is an inference of throwing a game. If you bet on your own team, you have money on your own team, it's going to affect your play, and that's a lifetime ban. Okay? Rose has never admitted that. Now, Mark Giamatti. There was something called collusion in the mid-1980s. That's my second book that's going to be coming out. All the owners and National League presidents and Peter Uberoth, the commissioner, all tried to keep free agency down. Okay, they all agreed that no team should pick up a free agent and that the players would have to, put their tail between their legs and go crying back to their team for less money. It affected salary arbitration. For the first time since Messersmith and McNally, things fell, and Giamatti was part of that. Now, Giamatti also gave an honorary degree to Smokey Joe Wood, who's also in my Ty Cobb Trish Speaker book, who did gamble on the game. And when he was president of Yale, inducted him into the Yale Hall of Fame, even though Smokey Joe admitted in the mid-'60s for the glory of the times, and I have the actual tape, that he bet on baseball. Now let's forward 4 years after that. We got Pete Rose here. The collusion cases all came to an end, and they found Major League Baseball guilty as sin, and Giamatti was part of the biggest scandal ever in baseball, and yet he punishes Rose. So you see where I'm going with this?
Oh, sure.
You see what I'm saying? Pete Rose wasn't the biggest scandal of the 80s. The collusion cases were, because you had all 26 teams, you had all the general managers, all their henchmen, all the coaches. They were all in on it, and the American League, National League presidents, as well as the commissioner. And baseball had to pay back $280 million in back pay to the free agents that were not allowed. And that's why you see Kirk Gibson in a Dodgers uniform that year in 1988, because he was granted free agency when the decision came down in 1985. He couldn't sign anywhere. He wanted $8 million for 3 years, and no team decided to take him. They all had the same memo. Don't take any free agents. We're driving salaries down. We can't do away with it. And that's why he steps up, injured, and hits a home run for the Los Angeles Dodgers, because he was granted a new look. And that is a lot more important than whether, to me, Pete Rose bet on a game. You're talking millions of dollars that were stolen from these players, and you're talking about bets, so big deal. And then the owners have the audacity to say, well, we're not going to pay you this, that. You know what we're going to do? We're going to make 4 new Major League Baseball teams: Colorado, Tampa Bay, Arizona, and the Marlins. And those fees fees coming into the game, those franchise fees, will pay our old debts. And that's what happened.
Yeah, I'm glad you're writing about it, Ian, because it is a wildly overlooked part of baseball. And people get down on the financial situation that baseball is in with players getting gigantic contracts. Well, if you go back and you look at collusion, it laid the ground for a lot of bad feelings, and understandably so. It was one of the stupidest, group-wide ideas. How in the world this was ever supposed to actually work? I mean, it sounds like something that a bunch of guys get together at the gym and go, oh, it'd be good if nobody signed any free agents. That'll take care of it. But somehow the powers that be thought this would actually be a viable thing. And yeah, it was a 9-figure mistake.
And the weird thing about it was that the day after Bart Giamatti died, the decisions came out, and I think in Collusion 3, so, Giamatti was dead by that time, and Vincent came in and said, you guys colluded, and he was totally against the owners. And, of course, he had a coup because he didn't side with the owners, and they made Bud Selig, who was one of the architects of collusion, along with, what's his name, Reinsdorf in Chicago. And They were the architects. But you know what? I just digress for a second from your book. I wanted to throw some interesting stuff out there. 400. You know something? Ted Williams. But you know something? He was done a lot more in the dead ball era, and that's why I say it's not so bad to play the small ball. What's going on with a 400 hitter?
Yeah, you haven't seen one since 1941. The story about Williams, I'm not sure people would realize, he comes into the last day of the season, and, I think he's hitting 3.995 or something like that, and then, there's thought of do you sit him and let him round it up to 400, and Williams chooses, the courageous way to go, to try to go out there and make it happen legitimately. And he comes up to bat and, by his own admission was incredibly nervous, of course. And the home plate umpire, a guy named Bill McGowan, steps out, calls time, dusts off the plate, and says to hit 400, a batter's got to be loose. It's got to be loose. And there's this possibility that kind of breaks the ice for Williams, who steps into the box, watches two balls, gets a base hit, and never goes below 400. For the rest of the day, gets 6 hits on the day, hits 406, and he's the last guy to hit 400. So an umpire may inadvertently have helped the last 400 hitter make it. And we've had some guys come close, but again, it's one of those things. Maybe Ted Williams was just lucky there wasn't an ESPN in 1941. Because if you're coming into the last day of the season hitting 3.995 now, oh my goodness, I can't imagine, particularly if you're playing for the Red Sox or the Yankees or a big market franchise like that. Oh, it would be an unbearable media crush. But honestly, for something like that, I think if you're playing for the Rays, it would still be a huge media crush. But that, as much as the pitching is the thing you got to face today. It's not that people don't want you to do it. It's that they want you to do it so much that the attention is going to make it almost unlivable.
Yeah, and you know something? I remember I was 10 years old. George Brett almost did it in 1980. He hit 390, I think. And, of course, Tony Gwynn in the strike shortened season, which, again, the ill feelings from collusion, and now they want a salary cap, ended the season in 1994. And those were probably the two closest we've got since Teddy ball games. Hey, but I like this one. We're talking about the Chalmers affair, like I mentioned earlier, surviving shenanigans to winning a league batting title. And not a lot of people know about the Chalmers deal. Let's talk about Chalmers and Rose and Cobb and LaJoey.
Yeah, the whole Chalmers thing, there actually are whole books about that, and justifiably so. You mentioned it earlier, Lashway goes up and gets 8 hits on the last day of the season to apparently edge out Cobb for the batting title. The part of it that you weren't sure about was whether Cobb was walked. No, actually, Cobb took the cheap way out. Cobb was out of the lineup, so he was protecting his higher average. He sat out the last 2 games of the year and had a 6-point lead, and thought that would take care of it. But yes, meanwhile, the St. Louis Browns were just in a very giving mood and apparently decided to tell their third baseman he should play somewhere in left field, and a series of bunts followed. But ultimately, somehow Cobb ends up getting credited with the title anyway. There are all kinds of statistical anomalies that are coming up. Even to this day after the fact, it's not entirely clear that the stats were right. Apparently Cobb was given 2 extra hits that he didn't get, and then that was noticed sometime late in the 20th century. But you get a manager and a coach from the Browns fired and blackballed out of baseball. Chalmers was a car company that had pledged to give an automobile to whoever won the batting title, and it was such a publicity black eye for them that they end up giving both guys a car and then realizing, maybe that's not the way that we want to go. I think they started giving a car to whoever won what was essentially a prototype of the MVP award, because that was a little harder to manipulate. But throughout baseball, there's always guys will mysteriously sit out the last game and the last couple of games to protect the lead. There's an ugly incident in the 70s with George Brett and Hal McRae that I knew nothing about, but found some contemporaneous accounts, and there are suggestions that could have been a racist element in Brett winning the title over McRae. And it was odd to me because the explanation that was accepted at face value at the time was that McRae was just such a hard-charging, kind of borderline dirty player. And I thought, well, I don't remember George Brett being a shrinking violet. I think of the Pine Tar game, and that was pretty intense in my memory. But the Brett McRae thing is something that, unless you have a superb memory of mid-'70s baseball, might catch you by surprise as much as it did me.
Yeah, and and that was before the Pine Tar. That was 3 years before because, Billy Martin, I remember that. And I was watching it on TV, on my black and white TV. No, I had color by then. In 82, I got a color TV. And I remember, the umpires looking at it, and it was just, a keen eye by Billy Martin to look at the bat and say, look, there's too much Pine Tar on it. And, another thing about Billy Martin was he was schooled by Casey Stengel, who was schooled by John McGraw, the biggest cheater, in baseball. For a manager, he did it all in the dead ball era when he was on the Baltimore as the pre-dead ball eras. And, of course, he knew all the tricks of the trade. And Casey Stengel tutored under him while he was with the Giants in the early 20s. And, and Casey just, handed it down to Martin. And it goes back to that old notion, the old way of doing things. We're going to doctor a ball, just like Gaylord Perry and Joe Niekro and Don Sun. And those guys are sitting in the Hall of Fame. When they all cheated.
No, sure.
Yeah, Don Sun shouldn't be there. Gaylord Perry shouldn't be there. Those guys cheated, and rightfully so. Even Whitey Ford. When he lost it after the 64 season, he got injured. And I remember, I think he pitched one game in the 64 World Series. Ellie Howard was the catcher. And what happened was, years before Yogi Berra thought in Whitey Ford's locker, he saw a can and he thought it was underarm spray, and he sprayed it. And his armpits stuck to each other. His arms were stuck to his chest for like a day or so. And Ellie Howard, he used to give it to Ellie Howard inside of his glove, and he would throw the ball and he would put sticky stuff, but he also had a little nail in his catcher's mitt, and every time he would throw the ball for it, right before he threw it back, he would nick the ball with the nail, so that it could do things. He made mud pies around the mound, and he became good because he had lost his effectiveness by then. But they all cheated. Even after the 1920 agreement. You can't spit. But I'm going to tell you what. We're going to get you back on the show to do part 2 of this because the hour's up, and I could just sit here and talk to you for hours. And something that I like to do with all my authors, but especially it's a lot of fun when we go into. We got so much more to talk about here, and we'll do it next time. We'll probably bring you back in the fall because June's going to be busy, and then summer I watch the kids, and then of course the fall comes and everyone's ready for the pennant race. But, hey, I hope you enjoyed your time today, Joe.
Always, man. Always good to talk baseball and, enjoy running the gamut from dead ball stuff to where we're at right now and the chance to look at small parts of what's a giant and incredibly fun history is always rewarding. I love the show.
Let me ask you, are you working on anything currently?
I am. I wish I could say more about it. I can say that there is something. I can say that it'll be out around about February of 2019. And, about the only other thing I can say, I am incredibly excited about it, Ian. I think if I can do this book justice, it could be the best thing I've written, and hopefully by a wide margin. So, stay tuned. There'll be more details in the not distant future, but incredibly excited about it, working on it now. Going to go to Cooperstown next month to do some research. So, it'll be happening before we know it.
Fantastic. And hold the line, because this is how I end my show. Folks, you know something? You like stats. You like rarities in baseball. You like things that don't happen every day. You want to know more about these great, unassisted triple plays and 40-40 seasons. You want to know about, how many consecutive innings, which we didn't go into, but we will next time. Pick this book up. I think the research by Joe is awesome. He's an attorney like me, so you spend your time in books. Now you spend it online. When I went to law school, we had to learn the book method. Online wasn't even a thing back then. But, hey, pick up the book. We're going to save part 2 for the fall. Folks, hey, it's been great. It's always great, folks tuning in. And, we'll be back next time. We're going to have a couple of good shows coming up. One of them is going to be Tim Wendell's Cancer Crossings. He's taking a break from baseball to writing about a group of doctors in the 1960s who tried to cure a form of childhood leukemia and the obstacles they had to, endure to overcome this and actually help out in breaking medicine back in the 1960s. And with that, that's a wrap. And as always, I'm Ian Kahanowitz. Thank you, Joe, for being on the show. I'm in for the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And in the immortal words of Edward R. Murrow, good night, folks. Good luck. We'll see you next time.